In Vietnam, an American soldier could make himself a target without firing a shot. All he had to do was carry this antenna. It rose above his shoulders as he moved through the jungle. It followed him across open ground. And, to an enemy soldier watching from concealment, it could reveal something more important than the identity of the man beneath it. It could reveal the location of the command group. The soldier carrying it was the radio telephone operator, the RTO. He usually stayed close enough to his platoon leader to hear an order, transmit it, and receive an answer. If the platoon needed artillery, helicopter gunships, reinforcements, resupply, or a medical evacuation, the RTO could become its only immediate voice beyond the battlefield. That made the radio indispensable. It also made the man carrying it visible. An official United States Army history of communications in Vietnam recorded the danger plainly. The short antenna used in the jungle drew enemy fire, and the operator became a target for snipers. Some American units responded with a remarkably simple field expedient. They turned the radio upside down on the pack, pointing the antenna toward the ground. But hiding the antenna did not remove the responsibility, because when a patrol was cut off, pinned down, or surrounded, the RTO was still the man who had to make contact and keep making it while the enemy tried to stop him. RTO stood for Radio Telephone Operator. Soldiers often shortened that to Radio Operator or simply Radio Man. In many infantry platoons, it was a duty inside the platoon's command group, often performed by an infantry soldier. He was not a technician waiting safely behind the line. He walked with the formation, carried a weapon, and entered the same fight as everyone around him. He just entered it with an additional load. By the middle of the war, one of the familiar sets on American backs was the A&P RC-25. It was a portable FM radio built for tactical voice communication. The Army began sending it to Southeast Asia in 1965 and later supplemented it with the improved PRC-77. The precise load varied by unit, mission, batteries, and the way the set was packed. Vietnam veteran Marty Yakel remembered his PRC-25 at about 25 pounds, with an extra battery adding to the load. With his other equipment, he recalled carrying 50 to 60 pounds on his back. And the weight was only part of the job. The RTO had to protect the handset and the controls from mud and rain. He had to watch battery life. He had to know which frequency to use and monitor the net while moving. He had to stay close to the leader, yet remain alert to the same tripwires, firing positions, and movement in the brush that concerned every rifleman. The radio did not replace his rifle. It competed with it. If you want more forgotten stories about the men who carried the hardest responsibilities in war, subscribe to Forgotten War Stories. Now look at why this load placed the operator in the most revealing part of the formation. When contact began, the RTO might need one hand for the handset and the other for his weapon. He could be listening to a transmission while men shouted beside him, helicopters passed overhead, and rifle or machine gun fire broke across the same ground. Most importantly, he could not simply choose a safer place to walk. The value of the radio came from its proximity to the man making decisions. That was the first paradox of the job. The RTO carried the device that could save the platoon, but to use it effectively, he had to remain near the person the enemy most wanted to find. A platoon on the ground could see only the terrain immediately around it. A battalion command post could see a larger battle. Artillery batteries might be miles away. Helicopters could be circling beyond a ridge. A medical evacuation crew might be waiting at an airfield without knowing that wounded Americans needed them. The radio connected those separate worlds. Through the radio operator, the platoon leader could report where his men were, what they had encountered, what direction the enemy was moving, and what support was required. The request might pass through more than one level of command. It might be relayed by another station or an aircraft. But at the edge of the fight, it began with a working set and a soldier who could transmit clearly under pressure. Each link could change the battle in a different way. Artillery could suppress an enemy position or block a route of approach. Gunships could strike forces that infantrymen could hear but not see. Reinforcements could close a gap or reach a unit at risk of being overrun. Resupply could bring ammunition and water to men who could no longer move. Dustoff could take the wounded from a clearing to surgical care. But none of those assets could safely act on a vague request. The RTO did more than announce that the platoon was in trouble. The network needed useful information, the unit's identity, its location, the nature of the contact, and the support required. Then the operator had to listen for instructions, corrections, and warnings, and repeat them accurately to the leader beside him. The PRC-25 was rated for roughly 3 to 5 miles under ordinary tactical conditions. That was a major improvement over older sets, but range on paper was not a guarantee in Vietnam. Hills could stand between stations. Thick terrain complicated communications. A platoon in low terrain might need a relay on higher ground, an airborne command and control aircraft, or a larger antenna to reach the next station. And the enemy understood what the network meant. North Vietnamese and Viet Cong forces did not need to decode every American transmission to understand the tactical value of a radio. Silence the operator, damage the handset, separate him from the leader, or force a platoon off its frequency, and the Americans' advantages could become harder to coordinate at the moment they were most needed. Army communications records describe enemy jamming and false messages on American nets in some operations. This was not simply a contest over equipment. It was a contest over time, trust, and control. The faster the RTO could establish contact, the faster the platoon leader could influence events beyond rifle range, and that is exactly why the antenna mattered. Imagine the patrol from the enemy's point of view. Most of the Americans carry similar weapons and wear similar field gear. Rank markings may be difficult to see through vegetation. A platoon leader does not need to stand in front and point dramatically. He may be only another helmet moving through the trees, but one soldier has a long antenna rising from his load. That visual clue can narrow the search. The RTO needed to remain within speaking distance of the platoon leader. That placed him near the center of decision-making and often near other essential men, the platoon sergeant, a forward observer, or a medic. The exact arrangement changed with the terrain in the fight, but the underlying problem remained. Fire directed toward the antenna could threaten more than the operator. This is where the history is often exaggerated. There is no single credible stopwatch that tells us an RTO had only 30 seconds, 5 minutes, or any other fixed span to live in combat. Survival depended on the mission, the terrain, the unit, and the enemy. Many radio operators served through repeated patrols and engagements. The danger was real without the myth. The Army's own history states that the short antenna drew fire and made the operator a sniper target. Veterans described the radio man as conspicuous, heavily loaded, and tied to the command element. An enemy soldier did not need a mythical rule to recognize that attacking the radio could disrupt the Americans around it. So some units altered the way the set was carried. They reversed the radio on the backpack and aimed the short antenna down. According to the Army account, the change did not appear to reduce the set's range. It was not elegant. The antenna could brush against vegetation, and the controls were less convenient, but it lowered the most recognizable part of the silhouette. It was a field solution to a field problem, remained connected without advertising the command group above every man's shoulders. Still, concealment had limits. The RTO eventually had to lift the handset. He had to transmit. He had to remain near the leader. And if the short antenna could not reach the next station, the unit faced a harder choice. To get a stronger signal, somebody might have to expose a larger antenna. Enemy fire was the most obvious threat to an RTO, but it was not the only one. Water could enter the handset or controls. A battery could arrive already weakened by heat and poor storage. The operator could begin a mission believing he had hours of power and discover that the battery delivered only a fraction of its expected life. Army records specifically noted that some batteries in Vietnam failed early because they had been stored badly before reaching the field. Then there was the country itself. Tactical FM radio worked best when stations had a usable path between them. A few miles of flat terrain could be very different from a few miles divided by a ridge. A unit moving into a low area could hear a signal weaken or disappear. The radio might be operating exactly as designed and still fail to reach the station that mattered. Units answered the problem in several ways. A second station could relay the message. An aircraft overhead could connect men separated by terrain. On the ground, soldiers could use the longer sectional antenna or erect an RC-292, an elevated antenna designed to extend the reach of tactical radios. In some cases, men climbed or secured an antenna head high in a tree. Army communicators also built field-expedient antennas from available material. Under favorable conditions, those improvised systems could reach far beyond the normal platoon radio range. But every solution demanded something. A relay required another operator to be listening. An aircraft could not remain overhead forever. High ground might already be watched by the enemy, and a larger antenna took time to assemble, raised a clearer signature, and often had to be placed where it could do its job. The operator also carried the physical cost, hour after hour. A heavy radio changed the way a man crossed a stream, climbed into a helicopter, or dropped behind cover. The antenna caught vines. The handset cable snagged gear. Batteries added weight, but could not be discarded casually. And when a patrol halted, the RTO did not completely rest. The radio net still had to be monitored. One veteran remembered that the advantage of being the RTO was that he did not have to walk point and usually knew what was happening. That advantage came with a qualification. He knew what was happening because the traffic kept coming to him. The job placed information, weight, and responsibility on the same back. And sometimes, in a matter of seconds, water or a single bullet could take the entire network away. On June 19, 1968, Company C, 1st Battalion, 27th Infantry, entered a fight west of the Saigon River. The details were later preserved in United States Army interviews with officers and soldiers who had been there. The helicopters were departing when enemy fire opened from extremely close range, roughly 10 to 15 meters in one account. The landing area offered little useful cover. Men were hit before the company could organize itself on the ground. Platoon Sergeant Woodrow Mitnall reached a water-filled bomb crater with a machine gunner and a radio operator. In the confusion, both the radio and its handset went under the water. The set stopped working. The gunships above the battlefield could still see portions of the fight and provide fire. Elsewhere, leaders and surviving radios continued to act, but Mitnall's group no longer had its own voice on the net. According to the Army interviews, they remained without radio communication for about 3 hours while the equipment dried. 3 hours is a long time in any battle. It is longer when a man cannot report his location accurately, longer when he cannot warn another element about enemy movement, longer when a wounded soldier beside him has no direct path to a Dustoff request. Another group in the same action faced that reality. Several wounded Americans had gathered together, but the men with them did not have a functioning radio. They waited roughly 1 to 2 hours for reinforcements to reach them with another set. Only then could they call for medical evacuation. That delay does not mean no one was trying to help. It means help required information, and information required a working link. After the fight, one of the radios recovered from the field had a bullet hole through its receiver and handset. Consider what these failures reveal. The radio itself did not fire a weapon. It did not carry a casualty. It did not command a platoon. Yet its loss changed what every one of those men could do. The leader's knowledge became local. The wounded men's need remained trapped inside their perimeter. Aircraft overhead possessed speed and firepower, but the men below had less ability to direct them. The RTO was therefore protecting more than a machine. He was protecting continuity. If an operator was wounded, another soldier could take the set. If the battery failed, it could be changed. If the handset was wet, the men could try to dry it. Infantry units built redundancy wherever they could, but in the minutes before that replacement arrived, the tactical world became smaller. That is why radio operators were expected to remain with the command element even under fire, and it is why other soldiers would cross exposed ground to recover a radio when an operator went down. The set represented access to orders, to support, and to the larger American force beyond the trees. There was, however, another side to this problem. Sometimes the small antenna was not enough. Sometimes keeping it concealed was no longer the safest choice. Sometimes soldiers had to build a larger target in the middle of a battle because remaining silent was worse. In November 1966, during Operation Attleboro, Major Guy Malloy of the 1st Battalion, 27th Infantry found himself trying to control a rapidly expanding fight in War Zone C-11. American rifle companies converged around a rough landing zone near the Michelin rubber plantation. The short antenna on Malloy's radio could reach units close to him, but it could not reliably reach the supporting elements outside the immediate fight. The battalion needed more range. Sergeant First Class Ray Burdett, a communications specialist, began assembling an RC-292 antenna while enemy fire continued around the position. The antenna was designed to rise well above the small, flexible width carried by an RTO. Under normal conditions, erecting it was a deliberate communications task. These were not normal conditions. Burdett worked while lying prone. Once the sections were assembled, He and another soldier raised the antenna and leaned it against a tree. The radio reached out. Through that new link, Miloy's position could communicate with the elements coordinating reinforcements, artillery and air support, medical evacuation, and resupply. The battle continued for 2.5 days. Army historian Charles Meyer later wrote that the radio was Miloy's only link with many of his unit commanders during the action. The contrast could not be sharper. On a patrol, soldiers turned the radio upside down to hide a short antenna from enemy eyes. At Attleboro, soldiers raised a far larger antenna in the middle of enemy fire because the battalion could not survive as isolated pieces. Both actions served the same purpose: preserve command. An antenna was dangerous when it revealed the men around it. It was also dangerous when it could not reach far enough. Radio operators and communications soldiers lived between those two risks. They had to create the smallest possible signature while maintaining the strongest possible link, and the solution was never purely technical. Someone had to carry the equipment. Someone had to assemble it. Someone had to stand, crawl, or lie beside it while rounds struck the surrounding ground. Someone had to keep listening when the message coming through the handset could change what hundreds of men did next. 2 years after Attleboro, a 20-year-old private carried that responsibility into another rescue mission. His radio would help connect a surrounded platoon to gunships overhead. His name was Garfield Langhorn. Private First Class Garfield Langhorn had arrived in Vietnam in November 1968. He served with Troop C, 7th Squadron, 17th Cavalry, 1st Aviation Brigade. On January 15, 1969, his platoon received a mission that depended on speed and communication. An H-1 Cobra attack helicopter had been shot down on a wooded slope in Pleiku Province. 2 crewmen were missing. Langhorn's platoon was inserted to find them. The terrain was thick enough that the soldiers had to cut their way forward. As the platoon's radio operator, Langhorn coordinated with a command and control aircraft overhead while the men searched below. The radio connected a small body of soldiers moving through dense vegetation to commanders who could not see what was waiting on the ground. The platoon reached the wreckage. Both Cobra crewmen were dead. The Americans recovered the bodies and began carrying them toward a pickup zone. That movement slowed the formation and placed men under a heavy physical burden. Then North Vietnamese soldiers opened fire from camouflage bunkers to the front and right. The platoon was hit hard and quickly surrounded. Langhorn called the orbiting gunships into the fight. Their miniguns and rockets struck the enemy positions around the platoon. The support did not erase the danger. It gave the Americans space and time inside it. Langhorn remained beside the platoon leader, exactly where the radio operator's function required him to be. The official Medal of Honor citation records that he continued operating the radio while also firing his weapon and helping provide cover for the wounded. He was wounded himself. The fight continued into darkness. As visibility disappeared, the gunships could no longer deliver accurate fire safely around the tightening perimeter. The North Vietnamese force began probing closer. At that point, the radio could still carry voices beyond the battlefield. But fire support had limits. Distance, darkness, and the proximity of friendly troops had reduced what aircraft could do. The final threat came from inside throwing distance. An enemy grenade landed in front of Langhorn and beside wounded Americans who could not get away. There was no time to call for another asset. No frequency could move the grenade. No aircraft could intervene. Langhorn threw himself onto it. The explosion killed him. It did not kill the wounded men beside him. He was 20 years old. Garfield Langhorn's story should not be distorted into a claim that every radio operator met the same fate, or that his antenna alone caused his death. His platoon had been sent into dangerous terrain on a rescue mission and was ambushed by a concealed enemy force. Men in every position were exposed, but his actions show the full burden of the radio operator's place in the formation. He stayed beside the platoon leader. He maintained the link to the aircraft above them. He called combat power toward an enemy closing around the perimeter. He fought with his own weapon. He remained near the wounded. And when the technology had done everything it could do, the responsibility was still his. On April 7, 1970, President Richard Nixon presented the Medal of Honor posthumously to Langhorn's family. The citation honored his extraordinary heroism and selflessness at the cost of his life. The medal recognized one man's final act. The radio on his back reveals the chain of duties that brought him to that moment. The radio operator's equipment gave an infantry platoon a reach far beyond its rifles. Through one handset, a lieutenant could speak to a company commander. A pin-down unit could reach artillery. Wounded men could request Dustoff. A patrol separated by terrain could reconnect with the battle around it. That reach came at a cost. The radio added weight. Its batteries could fail. Water could silence it. Hills could block it. The operator had to stay close to the command group, monitor the network, transmit accurately, and fight when the enemy closed in. Above all, the antenna could show an unseen enemy where that responsibility was concentrated. There was never a universal clock counting down the life of every radio operator. There did not need to be. The historical record gives us something more meaningful than a legend: men carrying a necessary link through conditions designed to break it. Some protected that link by pointing the antenna toward the ground. Some crawled under fire to recover it. Some waited beside wounded men for another set to arrive. Some, like Ray Burdett at Attleboro, raised a larger antenna when silence became the greater threat. And some, like Garfield Langhorn, stayed on the handset while a perimeter closed around them. They could turn the radio upside down to hide the antenna. They could not hide the responsibility it placed on the man carrying it. If you want more forgotten war stories that sound impossible but really happened, subscribe and follow us.